Hello everyone, and welcome back to Stylized Station. We got a fun story for you guys today. I'm also really excited because I've made a few changes in the studio. I've worked on the lighting, I added a few little posters and stuff. I got more to do, but I'm excited to see how this is coming along. So I've been having a really good day today. You guys really seem to enjoy the Unreal Engine video that I did a few weeks ago. So for this week's story, I thought, hey, let's talk about another engine. In fact, one that is often said in the same breath of Unreal Engine. Unity. Unity used to be the star child of the game development scene. It used to be loved by everyone. It was created by three guys in a kitchen or a basement with the idea to make games accessible for everyone. But now it is a large multi-billion-dollar company. And because of that, it's done some pretty messed up stuff and has quickly become completely hated by everyone. While they've made lots of little bad decisions, there's one that pales in comparison to all the others. One decision that I might just call the worst business decision in gaming history, and that is what we're going to talk about today. So sit back, relax, grab a drink, maybe grab a snack, and let me tell you about the day that Unity betrayed everyone. Now, it's no secret that for decades, evil companies have done evil things. Activision Blizzard laid off 800 employees the very same quarter that they made $1.8 billion. Konami tried locking game saves behind microtransactions. Ubisoft launched NFTs that no one wanted. Epic Games has made kids rack up thousands of dollars in Fortnite debt. Take-Two sent private investigators to a modder's house, allegedly. And Nintendo, well, they'll sue you for breathing anywhere near a ROM. But in 2023, Unity did something worse. At the center of it all was John Viticello, Unity's CEO, and a man with a track record. Over a decade earlier, leaked audio captured him suggesting they charge players every time they reload their gun.
When you are 6 hours into playing Battlefield and you run out of ammo in your clip and we ask you for $1 to reload, you're really not very price sensitive at that point in time.
Then, in 2022, he publicly called devs who don't focus on monetization some of the biggest idiots. And yet, this was the man steering the most beloved game engine in the indie world. For over a decade, Unity had been the underdog's best friend, powering breakout hits like Cuphead, Rust, and Pokemon Go. It was free, flexible, and fair. No royalty fees, no greedy traps, just pay for the license and the rest was yours. But under Viticello, that was about to be broken. Because in September 2023, Unity made a decision so explosive, it shattered developer trust, sent studios fleeing, and cost the CEO his job. On September 12th, 2023, Unity dropped a bombshell. Without prior warning, the company announced a new Unity runtime fee that would charge developers every time someone installed their game. Doesn't that sound absolutely crazy? So the details of it were, starting on January 1st, 2024, if a Unity-made game surpassed 200,000 installs and $200,000 in revenue, Unity would begin billing the developer per installation, up to 20 cents per install beyond those thresholds. It didn't matter if the game was free, or part of a charity bundle, or on a subscription service. Suddenly, success could trigger an ongoing tax. Now, Unity framed this as a fair exchange. Unity said it wanted to, quote unquote, better balance the value exchange between Unity and developers, and bluntly admitted, we want to make more money so that we can continue to invest in the engine. So, to Unity's leadership, it was a necessary revenue move. But to developers, this was a clear betrayal. Many developers had chosen Unity specifically because it promised no runtime fees, a promise which was now broken in an instant. Within hours, that disbelief that developers felt turned to shock and anger. Unity can just start charging us a tax per install, and they can do this unilaterally. They can charge whatever they want. Can you imagine how a professional soccer player would feel if suddenly the refs said that the rules are changing mid-game? It wouldn't feel very fair, would it? I don't know if that's a great analogy, but that's the closest one I can come up with right now in this situation. Almost immediately, developers began pointing out terrifying scenarios. Would they be charged for pirated copies or multiple reinstalls by the same user? What if a game went like viral on Game Pass or was included in a charity bundle, leading to millions of downloads that never translated to equivalent revenue for the developers? One veteran developer, Rami Ismail, noted a new dark possibility. If players ever got angry at a Unity-based studio, they could simply install and uninstall and rinse and repeat that en masse to straight up tank the studio financially. A simple revenge campaign by trolls could bankrupt a small game company under this install fee. So good luck if you ever piss off your user base, Ismail warned. It was a nightmarish prospect. Developers now had to fear not just bad reviews, but bad actors weaponizing Unity's fees against them. The sentiment was summed up by another developer on social media. There is no way Unity talked to a single developer before launching this. The plan felt not only greedy, but profoundly disconnected from the reality of how games are made and played. Now, by that evening of the announcement, the story was everywhere in developer circles. It was very clear that this was a breaking point in the Unity development community. Ironically, Unity's fee had done what years of game industry feuds could not. It united developers in absolute outrage. A firestorm ignited across social media and forums. Game developers, big and small, from one-person indie teams to huge studios, spoke with one voice. This was completely unacceptable. The loss of a formerly user-friendly game engine to the darker forces of the industry has left us dismayed, wrote the team behind Terraria. We cannot sit idly by as these predatory moves are made against studios everywhere. The Unity runtime fee quickly became the most hated idea in gaming. For once, competitors and rivals in the dev community found themselves on the same side, all pointing at Unity. Prominent developers publicly lambasted Unity's leadership. Makers of Cult of the Lamb, which is a huge indie hit at the time, tweeted in bitter humor, "Buy Cult of the Lamb now, because we're deleting it on January 1st. The implication was clear. They'd rather remove their game from sale than pay Unity's new tax. Now, the studio did later imply that it was a joke born out of frustration, but the message resonated as a sign of how betrayed creators felt. This backlash spread beyond just developers. Players, journalists, even industry leaders started weighing in. The hashtag Unity trended on X, formerly Twitter, for days, flooded with angry posts and ominous warnings. Unity's own forums and Discord channels were inundated with questions and complaints to the point that Unity staff went silent, seemingly completely overwhelmed by the negativity. Some studios took especially drastic action. In an unprecedented step, Megacrit, who are the developers of Slay the Spire, one of my favorite games ever, issued its first ever public statement since the company's founding, and it was to condemn Unity. They revealed their new game had been in development in Unity for 2 years, but now, unless the policy was completely reversed, they would start over in a new engine. They even said themselves in a final gut punch, "We have never made a public statement before." That is how badly you fucked up. When a normally quiet, like heads down studio uses words like that, you know the bridge is truly burning. So of course, developers begin exploring alternatives. Almost immediately, interest surged in Godot, an open source game engine. In a show of solidarity, Relogic, the studio behind Terraria, announced it would donate $100,000 each to the Godot and FNA engines, despite Terraria barely using Unity at all. "We feel like we cannot sit idly by," Relogic wrote, urging the community to support open source tools that put developers first. They even pledged to give $1,000 every month to these projects to help them grow, which is pretty cool. Other developers and publishers echoed the sentiment, some literally putting their money where their mouth was to stick it to Unity. At this point, it really doesn't feel like people are just upset anymore, does it? This is a full-on revolt. This is like a revolution that is happening online in front of our eyes. Unity's move was driving its own customers into the arms of competitors and open source alternatives practically overnight. And as the backlash intensified, reports emerged that hundreds of mobile game publishers whose lifeblood was Unity's engine and ad network were preparing to boycott Unity's services. In one night, Unity had managed to not only unite game developers against it, but also mobilize other industry players to consider jumping ship. And the company's name, Unity, of all things, was being dragged through the mud in headlines and memes. And it was about to get even worse. Now, Unity took some time to reply, and every day of silence or slow response from Unity was like gasoline on the fire. Developers joked grimly that the company's slogan should change from "Made with Unity" to "Betrayed by Unity." Many started seriously learning new engines, sharing tips on switching to Unreal or Godot and any other engines out there. The trust that Unity had spent a decade building was evaporating in mere days. By the end of the week, the question on everyone's mind was, what on earth was Unity thinking? And would they even survive this? Now, behind the scenes, Unity seemed to be in complete panic mode. The company's initial response was slow and only really made things worse. Rather than immediately retracting the policy, Unity tried to clarify it, and those clarifications poured even more fuel onto the fire. In a hastily written FAQ, Unity confirmed the worst. Yes, if a player deleted and reinstalled a game, it would count as 2 installs, and thus 2 fees. The outrage somehow grew even louder. Developers imagined entire communities repeatedly reinstalling games to bankrupt a studio just out of spite. Unity quickly backpedaled on that, saying regrouping had led them to decide reinstalls wouldn't count after all. Now, this sounds like a good thing, but it is a little whiplash-inducing, isn't it? Unity said one thing, then reversed it within a day under pressure, eroding confidence that they even understood their own policy. And more tweaks followed. Unity stated that charity games and bundles would be exempt from the fees, but provided little details on how, leaving developers a little skeptical. They refused to fully explain how installs would be tracked, vaguely referencing a proprietary data model that only fueled rumors that Unity might employ spyware or some sort of intrusive DRM. In another PR misstep, Unity's official account posted that the new fee would only affect about 10% of developers. Almost immediately, the community clapped back, adding a context note on Twitter pointing out that 10% of Unity's developer base is roughly 23,000 developers, hardly a comforting statistic. Unity then deleted the post. A little embarrassing. Each attempt at damage control was completely bungled, coming off as tone deaf or confusing, and the trust deficit only deepened from here on out. But as anger peaked, things took a bit of a darker turn. On September 14th, Unity abruptly closed 2 of its offices and canceled an all-hands town hall meeting due to what it called a credible death threat. Now, all the memes online and stuff are funny, but this is not funny, right? This is serious over game development, a death threat. I think this is like kind of getting a little out of control at this point. A little. It's getting really out of control. Shockingly, it turned out that the threat came not from an external troll, but allegedly from a Unity employee who was furious at the situation. Police were involved and employees were told to stay home for their safety. Now, like I said, this is a surreal escalation, a pricing change that had led to actual security threats within days. The incident underscored just how volatile and emotional the atmosphere had become, both outside and inside the company. Unity's own people were in turmoil. One Unity insider later described the period bluntly: "We were at war with our customers." For Unity staff, it must have felt like the ground was falling away from underneath them. Their community of users had turned into an angry mob, and even some colleagues were ready to erupt. By now, the story had leapt from trade press to mainstream news. Major outlets started covering the Unity debacle and how one of the most popular game engines in the world had antagonized its entire user base. Now, Unity is a publicly traded company, so their stock price went into freefall, dropping nearly 20% in the span of 2 weeks as investors panicked over the backlash, which means hundreds of millions of dollars in market value evaporated, a clear sign that the company's leadership had made a colossal misjudgment. Unity's executives, watching their stock tumble and their reputation burning, had to act fast or risk a total collapse of goodwill that could take years to rebuild, if it could be rebuilt at all. So, on September 17th, after nearly 5 days of deafening outrage, Unity's leadership finally bowed. In the evening, the company posted a public apology on X. "We have heard you. We apologize for the confusion and angst the runtime fee policy caused. We are listening, and we will be making changes to the policy. We will share an update in a couple of days." But the damage was so deep that the apology did little to calm the community. Many found the phrasing patronizing. The issue had not been confusion, but the opposite. You know, the developers understand the devastating impact, and telling them that they're confused can be pretty upsetting. The developers knew exactly why they were angry. Unity acting like it was all a misunderstanding only underscored how out of touch the company had seemed. Still, the admission of fault was the first crack in Unity's resolve, and it opened the door to possible compromise. Over the next week, Unity's top brass reportedly scrambled to revise the plan. Leaks and rumors suggested a major climbdown was imminent. According to a Bloomberg report, Unity was looking at capping the fees at 4% of a game's revenue for big developers and ensuring no changes for installs that happened before 2024. So, in other words, they were considering turning the infinite install fee into effectively like a small revenue share, something more akin to a traditional royalty cap. Finally, on September 22nd, Unity released an open letter to the community with its new terms, effectively walking back the most controversial parts of the runtime fee. That runtime fee, as originally envisioned, was dead on arrival. Under the revised policy, Unity Personal, the free tier, would remain free and no runtime fees would apply to games made with it. For Unity Pro customers, the fee would not kick in until a game earned $1 million in revenue and $1 million installs, 10 times the original threshold. Even then, developers would have a choice. Pay 2.5% revenue share on revenue beyond $1 million, or pay per install fees, whichever amount was less for them. Now, in practice, that meant most developers would opt for the 2.5% revenue share cap, making Unity's scheme resemble a more standard royalty. Crucially, Unity also promised that the new terms would not apply retroactively. Only games built on the next long-term support LTS version of Unity, shipping in 2024, would potentially incur fees. Projects staying on older versions would remain under the old rules. This is sounding a little better. And as a final sweetener, Unity dropped the requirement for Unity personal users to display the Made with Unity splash screen, a small gesture of goodwill to indie devs. Now, this is a pretty dramatic retreat, essentially canceling the runtime fee for the vast majority of games and limiting its scope, like heavily. Unity's open letter came with ample apologetic tones and assurances that, quote unquote, they listened to the community. The message was clear. Please don't leave. We fixed it. See? These concessions, while significant, came only after the outrage had reached a fever pitch. And for many developers, it was too little too late. Even if Unity were to recant their policies and statements, the destruction of trust is not so easily repaired. The Terraria team had presciently warned days earlier. Unity had taken more than a week to reverse course, and in that time, an indelible stain had formed on its reputation. Now, if you say that's a little overdramatic, think about this. Developers had been genuinely frightened for their livelihoods. Some had already spent tens of thousands of dollars porting their in-development games to new engines during that chaotic week. Unity's last-minute pivots and apologetic blog posts couldn't undo the stress and fury that had been unleashed on September 12th. Now, the open letter did calm some immediate tensions. A few studios cautiously held off on abandoning Unity, waiting to see if the company would truly stick to those promises. But a lot of damage was done. Unity's executives might have thought the nightmare was finally ending. But in truth, the fallout was only beginning, and the company's leadership was about to face the ultimate consequence of that lost trust. On the second week of October 2023, Unity's CEO, John Riccitiello, walked into a board meeting knowing his time was up. The backlash to the runtime fee had reached the highest levels of the company's board of directors and investors. Unity needed a public sacrifice, a signal to win back some goodwill, and Riccitiello was the obvious candidate. On October 9th, 2023, less than a month after the fiasco began, Unity announced that John Riccitiello was stepping down as CEO, president, and chairman, effective immediately. They pitched it as a retirement, but everyone knew it was essentially a firing. Riccitiello, who had led Unity for nearly a decade, was out. For many in the development community, this was a moment of vindication, even celebration. Riccitiello had long been a controversial figure. He was known as the man who had twice led Electronic Arts, earning a reputation for pushing aggressive monetization, and then taken the helm at Unity to make it a big corporate powerhouse. Under his leadership, Unity had gone public and chased aggressive monetization strategies, from ad partnerships to the ill-fated fee that we're talking about today. Developers saw him as the embodiment of the monetize first mindset that had caused this whole mess. After all, this was the same CEO who casually called idealistic game creators fucking idiots for not squeezing their players' wallets. Now, that mindset had cost him his job. In the corners of Twitter and Reddit, developers posted party gifs that raised virtual toasts. Ding dong, the witch is dead. Maybe a little grim, but also a sigh of relief. Maybe Unity could start turning a page. At least that's what Unity wanted you to think. The official press release was respectful, of course. It quoted Riccitiello as saying, "It's been a privilege to lead Unity." And he noted that he would stay on as an advisor to ensure a smooth transition. The board appointed James M. Whitehurst, a seasoned tech executive, as interim CEO. But these formalities mattered little to outraged developers. What mattered to them is that the man they blamed for the betrayal was gone. Because a month earlier, some had literally been calling for Riccitiello's resignation in open letters and posts. And now, they'd gotten their wish. But would it actually solve anything? In truth, Riccitiello's exit was both a chastening moment and a sobering one. Yes, the figurehead was gone, but Unity's problems weren't magically fixed. The runtime fee fiasco had exposed a rift between Unity and its community that went far beyond a single person. Getting rid of the CEO might have been necessary to even start rebuilding that trust, but it wasn't sufficient on its own. Unity's new interim CEO, in his first communications, acknowledged that much. He stated that Unity needed to, quote unquote, focus on rebuilding trust with our developers, and that the company would put community needs first. going forward. Words like that at one time would have sounded like common sense, now came off as a critical mission statement to save Unity's soul. Still, Riccitello's resignation was a pivotal chapter in this saga. It was the climax of the immediate narrative. An immensely powerful CEO brought down swiftly by a grassroots revolt of his own customers. It's poetic, isn't it? In the span of 1 month, game developers had gone from fearing Unity's power to forcing its most senior leader out of his job. It was a testament to the unity, pun intended, and persistence of the developer community. It sent a message echoing across the tech and gaming world. Never, ever take your community for granted, or you might lose everything. So after the dust started to settle in late 2023, Unity faced a long road to redemption. The company spent the following months attempting to repair relationships and implement the promises that they made in that open letter earlier. But in the court of public opinion, though, the verdict was already in. Unity's reputation had been deeply and permanently scarred. Many developers simply couldn't trust Unity's leadership anymore, no matter who was in charge, which is understandable. The phrase Unity tax became a punchline, a case study in how to alienate your user base in one easy step. The consequences of that fateful September continued to play out well into 2024. Some developers who had pledged to leave Unity followed through on those promises. In a remarkable turn of events, Slay the Spire 2, the sequel to the critically acclaimed indie game, announced it had fully ditched Unity and switched to the open source Godot engine for its development, citing the runtime fee debacle as the final straw. And the development studio Megacrit wasn't alone. Other studios also began new products in alternative engines, or at least started maintaining backup plans in case Unity ever pulled a stunt like this again. The trust that a platform will remain stable and fair, something essential in choosing an engine, had been completely shattered. Unity's competitors, meanwhile, seized the opportunity. Epic Games, the maker of Unreal Engine, openly courted disaffected Unity developers, emphasizing how their royalty model, 5% after a high revenue threshold, was predictable and developer-friendly. And of course, Godot, the once niche open source engine, experienced a renaissance, swelling in users, donations, and momentum. That $200,000 donation from Relogic that I mentioned earlier helped fund Godot's development, and suddenly a tool that few mainstream developers considered was on its way to becoming a really viable alternative. Unity's stumble had inadvertently given rise to a stronger multi-engine ecosystem as developers diversified out of sheer self-preservation. Even if Unity remained the market leader in engine tech, it was no longer assumed to be the default choice for indies. That ecosystem shift, a psychological change in the community, might have been Unity's biggest long-term loss from this whole saga. In a desperate attempt to win back hearts and minds, Unity's new leadership implemented policy changes beyond just canceling the fee. They vowed that any future changes to terms would apply to only new engine versions and not retroactively to existing projects, basically promising never to ambush developers again. They also doubled the revenue limit for the free Unity personal plan from $100K to $200K to prove that they still cared about small developers. And to recoup some of the lost revenue, Unity decided to simply raise the price of its pro subscriptions by about 8% starting in 2024. So at the end of the day, they're still looking out for number one. Now, this move was quietly implemented, but it went by with barely a peep of protest, a sign that developers probably much preferred an upfront price hike to any convoluted install-based fee. Unity was slowly learning what it should have known all along. Transparency and simplicity trump clever monetization schemes when it comes to developer goodwill. Surprise, surprise. A year later, in September 24, Unity fully canceled the runtime fee plan for good, this time with no replacement scheme up its sleeve. The company admitted defeat and reverted entirely to its traditional business model of seat-based subscriptions. As the Unity's new CEO put it, they wanted to ensure developers, quote unquote, feel comfortable building your business over the long term with Unity. It was a full 180-degree turn from the nightmare of the previous year. Now, when that announcement was made, Unity stock actually jumped up as investors sighed in relief. But the market recovery was small compared to the hole Unity had dug itself into. By late 2024, Unity's share price was down more than 50% from its highs, reflecting how much goodwill and future business the company had likely lost. And internally, hundreds of Unity employees also lost their jobs in waves of layoffs that accompanied the turmoil, an attempt to cut costs and stabilize the company after the revenue shortfall and costly PR disaster. The human toll of this fiasco extended to those employees, some of whom no doubt questioned the decisions that had led them there. Perhaps the most lasting impact of the runtime fee controversy is as a cautionary tale. In game industry circles, Unity's fee is now shorthand for an avoidable, self-inflicted wound. A case study to be discussed in business schools and GDC talks on how not to handle policy changes. Unity will be rebuilding their trust for years, one update and one conversation at a time. But developers have long memories, especially when they feel burned. This story will be told and retold whenever a platform considers squeezing its community a little too hard. The sheer speed and force of this backlash shocked even industry veterans. It was a reminder that in the age of social media, a single bad decision can ignite and topple even a giant in a matter of days. But words alone won't be enough. Unity now has to prove, through actions over a long time, that it understands the value of the developer community and will never betray them like this again. It's a hard lesson that came at a tremendous cost. It's a cautionary tale for every tech company. Never forget the humans who rely on your tools, because if you betray them, you might ignite a fire you cannot control, and it will be your own creation that burns. Ooh, spooky ending. I remember I was writing the end of that script and I was like, ooh, yeah. Where's the editor? Can you put the pen on fire meme at the end there? Well, that was fun. I had a lot of fun telling that one. And I'm liking my new background. This is feeling really, really cool. I'm really enjoying this. I gotta add some stuff up there. I gotta add my Gundams too. As always, thank you for watching Stylized Station. I'm gonna go do some research and I'll be back in a few days with another untold story in game development or TV or movies. I don't know. I'm not sure yet. I'm not sure what the next one's going to be totally honest. Depends if you like this one or not. So leave a comment, like the video, and if my voice lulled you to sleep, wake up from your nap. It's time to get back to work. Okay? All right. I'll see you guys in the next one. Hope you had fun.